Alex, it is great to have you here today. You helped build a category defining product that is a corporate spend management and brought Divvy from an initial mock up to a $2.5 billion exit. You then launched Factory for Good and currently invest through Tandem Invest and are the only general partner in Utah to have founded a tech unicorn. Today, we want to dig deeper into the choices, trade offs, and lessons you've learned. But let's just start with a little background. You grew up in Redmond, Washington, obviously, where Microsoft and many other companies, I guess Amazon isn't far away. Can you tell me a little bit about your upbringing and how you were raised? And first and foremost, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Mike. I really am excited about this. This should be a lot of fun. Growing up in Redmond, Washington was just crazy. It was a cow town. You used to come from what we called the city or downtown, and you drive by cow pastures to get up the hill into my house. And it was nothing. And all of a sudden, Microsoft comes and Nintendo and all these other companies like Costco is next door. And I go back now and it's just a whole different world. And so super lucky to grow up in a environment that was thriving and people were doing amazing things. My neighbor who wore mismatching Chinese shirts because he's from Taiwan. So he'd wear mismatching Hawaiian shirts and shorts. He'd come over and we'd play ping pong all the time. And he's one of the main developers for Windows 95. What a wild place to grow up and a lot of fun.
You were doing startups at an early age. Tell me a little bit about your childhood and what was your first startup?
I was doing a lot of unsuccessful startups at an early age. In high school, instead of working at McDonald's or the local grocery store, my parents, we taught swimming in our backyard. We had to go get our clients and create the curriculum and stuff like that. So I taught swimming as a kid. I taught skiing. I created a business with my buddy called Starving Students where we were barking people's yards, and we soon realized that we didn't like the work and we weren't good at quoting it. All of these things served their purpose and a lot of fun, and we were always kind of encouraged to try to start new things, learn that way as opposed to just working by the hour.
When you tell that story, I probably could tell many of the same stories from my youth of one business after another. I sold laser plans for 75 cents when I was 10 years old, believe it or not. And
who paid you 75 cents? Was that like a neighbor kid you hoodwinked, or how'd you pull that off?
We put an ad in the back of Popular Mechanics or Popular Science magazine. And the most important letter I ever got was from the president of Spectra Physics, I think, which was a laser manufacturer. It was a cease and desist order against a 9-year-old who was selling laser plans for 75 cents, or maybe I was 12, I don't know. But my point that I was getting at was when I listen to your story and think of my own, sometimes people say, are entrepreneurs bred? Does it come naturally? Or if you don't do the kind of things you were doing and I was doing and so many people we know as entrepreneurs, can you ever really become an entrepreneur? What do you think?
I do think it's a mindset, but that doesn't mean it's a hard and fast rule. I remember reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad as a kid. It connected with me because I wasn't amazing at school and just the old way of thinking of go to school, get good grades, then you can go work for a good company or become a doctor, and that's the way you're going to make it. And because I'd grown up also with a family, a great-grandfather, a grandfather, a dad of entrepreneurs, I was like, I can do it. And so the mindset was, you can take the risk. And the mindset is, go for it. Try to work on your own. That's the best case scenario. But I also know a bunch of people that are really smart, weren't planning on being entrepreneurs, and they became consultants, and then they fell backwards into having their own consulting practice. And now they are, quote, amazing entrepreneurs. So I don't think it's a hard and fast rule, but I would say you can nurture them and train them to think in the mindset of it's okay if you fail. It's okay to go for it and it not work. And that is a mindset I was happy to have as a kid.
I'm wondering if the way to interpret what you're saying is that you don't have to start out as an entrepreneur to become a successful entrepreneur later in life, but you do have to have certain essential skills. And one of them you just said is accepting failure and picking yourself up and starting over again. You can't be a very good entrepreneur if the first time you fail, you don't really realize that's sort of a badge of courage. I don't know about you, but I would never hire somebody in an important position that hadn't failed somewhere along the line and then figured out how to triumph after that.
I think one of my favorite interview questions, whether it's been asked to me or if I am interviewing someone I'm hiring.
So let's just spend a few minutes on the Divvy part because it's such an amazing story. How do you start an idea and then within just a few years have a $2.5 billion exit? You're part of a very small number of people who there's a book on hyperscaling. And how do you create that kind of growth? How do you deal with it? And then what's it like once it's behind you?
Oh man. I'm super proud of Divvy, so they're fond memories for me. My partner Blake Murray, he came to me and he goes, "Alex, I've got an idea." And he came to my house. We sat down in these blue couches, and I've got little kids running around, and Blake essentially lays out his idea. From the second he told me the idea, and then we started to shape it in that meeting to where we ended up taking it. I mean, like, you felt alive. You just were like, this is happening. And I know that someone's going to do it. And I think we can do it. And so there was this energy and this excitement that honestly is hard to replicate. And it's hard to even express to people how I knew that this was something I wanted to do. You know, we talked the other day, I was telling you that I took a big pay cut to do Divvy. And part of that was because I would like immediately from when Blake came down to my house and we talked on those blue couches, I knew that there was something here. And I was like, I got to go on this journey. So we spent the next, honestly, we spent the next 4 to 6 months like designing and building out and fleshing out the idea before we said, okay, let's quit our jobs and it become a full-time thing. And we thought the product would be super easy to build. So we're like, the product will be live in like 4 months by January of 2017. And it was January of 2018 that it was finally live with all sorts of roller coasters in between. So the first 2 years was all this pent up. We're excited, but yeah, we're not really going anywhere. We think that there's something, but this treadmill's not moving. I talk about it because I do venture capital now. I talk about it with young entrepreneurs. I'm like, let me tell you what product market fit feels like, because that's ultimately what we have when we launched. And we launched, and my only answer to this is we had product market fit because we had a product that people really wanted. And then we hired great people, and I was fortunate enough to get out of the way as much as possible and do what I can, but invite great people in with a great product. And 3 years later, we sold.
Was Blake the founder? What was the relationship between the two of you?
Blake was always the CEO and co-founder. So I was the head of revenue, and then I ultimately took on partnerships, but I was the co-founder.
Full disclosure, my first project, I was 25 and my partner was 57. And I fought like hell to be 50-50 partners. In retrospect, I can't believe he agreed. It worked out very well for him and very well for me. But it was really important for me to be an equal partner with this man. And a part of our success came from that. But that's not the only route to success. How did it work with the two of you?
So Blake and I are born in the same month, in the same year, in the same city, and we're both twins. We share a lot of background, but Blake was always senior. This was his idea. His family was our original investors. So he was the guy. And I describe it this way, and I think this was one of our secrets to success. He was the quarterback. I was the running back. My job was to help support and guide and build up Blake and build up Divvy, but I was not in charge. Blake was. And I think a lot of times really good companies get stuck in that fight for who's in charge and who's all powerful. And I'm not telling, anyone that they should not or not have that fight, because I think every situation is a little different. But ours worked really well because Blake was the king and I was whatever you call it, the prince. That allowed us to have this dynamic where I could tell him how I feel or tell him what I thought or correct him if I thought that was needed. But also it was his decision. So he knew who was on first. He knew that it was his decision to call the play and go. And I was there to help, guide, support, promote, do everything on the side. And I think I did that job well, but very much I knew my role and he knew his role. And I think that's what allowed us to have a lot of success as a partnership.
It's such a beautiful way that you express. You might say he was in a senior position. I'm not sure if that's the right way to describe it, but you're so comfortable. If somebody came to you today and said, I'm thinking about being part of a startup team, but I'm not the senior person, what's the one piece of advice you'd give them about making sure X happens before you sign on?
Yeah. So I might do more than one, but I usually say 3 things. I'm like, all right, so you have to ask yourself 3 questions about this person. Do you trust them? And I think that's the most important question, because if you don't trust them, then it doesn't matter how smart or wizardry or opportunity. Like if you don't trust them to do the right thing when you're not in the room, then you can't do it. So do you trust them? The second thing I would say is, are they competent? Do you want to get in that person's boat? And I remember telling my wife, I'm like, honey, I'm getting in Blake's boat. Like, I know I can row this boat, but I know it's Blake's boat and I'm getting in this boat.
Alex, you did something which to me is almost mind boggling. You took an 80% pay cut to take on, I'm sorry if this is the wrong word, junior position, meaning
Yep. No, it's fine.
you had the presence of mind to really understand the person you were about to take an 80% pay cut for. I think that's such a rare, amazing quality on your part. What was it that most gave you the courage to take that kind of pay cut when you had 4 young children at home, because you had the confidence that it was going to work out, obviously?
I would say there's two things. We talked about this earlier in terms of when you're young and you're an entrepreneur, you can take swings. And, my wife and I put ourselves in a position, we didn't have a ton of money, but we had enough to pay some bills. And so I could take a swing. So essentially we cut everything down so where our mortgage could get paid, but everything else is going to be pretty frugal. So the first thing is, like, I was lucky enough to be married to someone that allowed that we were together and could take the swing. So I was free to take the swing. But in terms of like actually taking the swing, because it wasn't about the money. I didn't start Divvy with Blake because I was like, oh man, I want to get rich. I wanted to go through the process of building tech, and I knew that there was something there and we were going to change the landscape of business spending. And I was just enthralled about that process and about that opportunity to go for it. I had no clue what could or could not have been at the end of this tunnel. So to me, it wasn't about the money. So when I gave up some money to quote unquote make more money, that wasn't the equation I was running. It was more about, this is where I can learn the most, grow the most, and I want to see if I have it in me. Like, it was more of a challenge to myself. I want to see if I can build this business. And I did know, I'm not dumb, I did know if we could do it, that there would be something at the end, but that wasn't my motivation and why I was doing it.
So you were 36 when you sold. That's 5 years ago or so.
Yep.
What have you been doing since the sale?
I took some time off. Loved like the first 4 months of that time off. I went through this phase of loss, which the loss is loss of like structure and identity. And the story I tell, which ultimately led into the book, is I was like, what do I do, with my time? And how do I feel that element of purpose? I missed it. I missed what we were just talking about, the long hours and the weeks and the challenges and the victories and the low points and the camaraderie and all that stuff. To me, I started interviewing people that had been down this road and just started asking questions. And I was essentially trying to solve for my great-grandfather and grandfather to be like, how do I end up in this position and not this position? And through that, ended up writing the book, which I did more as a challenge to myself. Again, as I'm sure you know, writing a book, unless you're certain people like Dan Brown, is not a profitable endeavor. It has been a fun journey, but I wrote that and then started venture capital, wrote the book, been trying to figure out, how we can make the world a better place since. And it's been a fun journey to learn a lot about myself and meet some people along the way.
The book has an amazing title, Factory for Good. I thought I knew what it was about until I actually read the book. What I got from the book is that your body, your post-sale body, your persona is the factory for good, not a physical building that's impacting. And this notion that as a human being, you have these inputs. Some of them are, physical inputs, food, chemicals, medicine, exercise, and some of them are emotional or spiritual, but it all combines in some production system called, the human species, and comes out. And you've clearly come down on the side of radical transformation using a liquidity event, not as the only, but as a very important transition opportunity for people to kind of wake up and smell the roses, to realize that the things that were driving them to be successful oftentimes are so focused and single-minded and really blocking out family, friends, health, politics, philanthropy, all of these things. And now you have this kind of blank factory floor. I don't know whether it's in your head or your heart, but you have this blank factory floor, and now you can rebuild the flat factory, and the new output is completely different. So maybe share a little bit about that.
You nailed it. That was great. I actually really enjoyed listening to you describe that. So I think a mistake that is made, and I would interview people and I would say, What did you do great? After your exit, what was the best thing you did? And what's the worst thing you did? And tell me about how money's affected your life. We'd have these fun conversations. And what I would typically find is those that were in the best situation. If I said to you, Michael, what do you care about most? I think it's a pretty easy answer. What's the most important thing to you in the world?
Right now, my family and unfortunately, the future of humanity.
We're going to not focus on the future of humanity in this podcast, but your first answer was what I was seeking, which is family. And everyone's answer is family, which is great. If it's not, it's a spouse or a partner and then your kids and your very close friends. And yet what you said is when you're chasing that mountain, that money mountain, and you're trying to go collect a certain amount of dollars, you can often make choices that push those people to the side without realizing that's happening. And my call to people is if you are fortunate enough to be in that position where you're no longer working to meet food needs and house needs and requirements, you can now retool your factory, rebuild your factory. So the output is no longer money. And I'm not a person who's like against money. I think money is incredible. I think businesses are incredible. I'm going to ask you the Bill Gates question in a second. Let's not forget that one because I think this is a good time to ask it. But I want people to think, hold on, if you really want what's best for you and for your family, retool your factory. And if that means you keep making money, make that an input. Make that a part of the process so that your output with your partner, your spouse, your kids, your close ones, your family, that you guys can make the world a better place and however you define it. And that's what it's all for. And when you do that together for something bigger than yourself, the equation means that the money will end up being an amazing thing for you and for your family and your community.
I'm convinced that if you take 100 people in any industry and line them up from most successful to least successful, using any measurement that's appropriate, published papers, published art, dollars, you could use any of them. The 50 people that are most successful will overwhelmingly have had mentors, and the 50 people that are least successful will overwhelmingly have excuses why they never found mentors. Have you built mentoring into your own practice to pay it forward, so to speak? Do you have young people who consider you a mentor?
When I left Divvy and wasn't doing anything, my now partner, McKay, came to me and said, hey, I want to leave my VC firm and start a VC firm. And I said, I know nothing about being a VC. I've obviously dealt with VCs, but I'm not some incredible VC expert. I said, but what I do know and what I do love, and the only thing I'm doing with my time right now that gives me real energy is working with younger founders. And if they want to take my time and they've shown that they're willing to put in the work, I'm like, I'll take it. So I said, McKay, I'll start Tandem with you if that's what it's about for me, is to help out the next generation of founders. So I do a fair amount of one-on-ones, speaking engagements. When anyone calls me, there are some people I'm closer to, obviously, but I love it. If I can help out the next generation have the same path or even better path than I did, then I'm all in for it. So hopefully I'm making good on it.
Isaac, we're making giving a cornerstone of this podcast this season, and you've been digging into an organization called understood.org. What stood out to you?
Well, understood.org helps millions of people with learning and thinking differences, like ADHD and dyslexia, unlock their full potential and reframe their differences as strengths. Understood is the only nonprofit solely dedicated to supporting this diverse community, which includes 70 million people in the US alone. What impressed me is how effectively they reframe conditions like ADHD and dyslexia. Instead of focusing on obstacles, they help people identify the unique strengths that come with thinking differently. Their resources empower individuals, families, and educators to turn those differences into powerful tools for innovation and achievement.
This aligns closely with what we've seen at Tiger 21. So many entrepreneurs succeed because they approach problems in unconventional ways. With the right support, those differences can become tremendous assets. We're matching donations up to $10,000 total, $100 per gift, to support understood.org. Learn more at understood.org or visit muse.com/giving, MUUS.com/giving, or the link in the show notes to contribute. You found solace in Aristotle. You talk about telos in your book, and that your own purpose is in creating and building. Obviously, there's lots of different entrepreneurs, but you and I have been down similar paths. And I've come to the conclusion pretty much the only thing that I'm interested in is creating things. That's what turns me on. It's the starting something. It's the doing something that couldn't be done and proving people wrong that it could be done, or having an idea and watching it come out. But once it grows, it wasn't but 3 years of success and you were out of there. I lasted about 5 years for most of my ventures as well, because once the plant was bearing fruit, I knew it needed to be tended. It just wasn't what I wanted to be doing myself.
And some people love that. Some people are built for the tending and the operating, and that's great. But I'm like you, Michael. There's a great way. And if I was to, when I talk to young 20-year-olds and I give them business advice, I'd say, look, you need to figure out what gives you energy, what takes your energy. And what I'm phrasing to them is, I would stand in front of a whiteboard and try to come up with an idea for free through the night, without food, without pay. And I would love it, because that thing is so fun for me to try to build something from nothing that I find a lot of energy in it. Where if you said, read these legal docs and manage these teams and tend it, I would fall asleep in 2 seconds and I would be like, never, you can't pay me enough to do that thing. For me, it is a little daunting in trying to come up with the second act and trying to be like, okay, what's next? What's going to be as great as Divvy? And it's a little insecure that sometimes maybe there's nothing.
I think you talk a lot about the power of purpose. That's one of the things I took from your book. Of when do you think you began leading a purposeful life, and how did you know it?
There's, quote, knowing it, and then there's living it. I'm grateful for my parents, obviously, that at least aimed me in certain directions and said, this is what we're about, this is what we're going to do, and this is where you're going to go. And I had great older brothers and sister that gave that example. So I think as a kid, you're kind of always, well, that's where I want to go. And so it gives you this purpose of, school, college. I went on a church mission, sports, like all these things that were purpose, but I didn't define it as that. And then the crazy thing about startups is they might not work, but I can guarantee you when you're doing a startup, you feel purpose, because you are working your butt off to try to make something happen. And you know exactly what you're supposed to do every single day and what you're trying to do. So I think I was lucky enough to have felt purpose my whole life, Michael, until after Divvy. And then when it was the absence of purpose, I was like, wait a minute. Like, I don't like this feeling at all. I don't enjoy this feeling of, well, no one needs me today and I'm not building anything today. And, I'm just kind of hanging out today. And I'd go to bed and I'd feel this. I use the phrase, I didn't earn my sleep. And when I started to feel that, I realized I was lacking purpose, and it helped me define what I was missing. And that's where I got really passionate about, you've got to have something that drives you. And so I would say I finally realized that when I was around 36.
Alex, this is such an extraordinary experience for me. The Tiger community that we're both part of has kindred souls. We really never met before. We're 30 years apart. You live on another side of the country. You're a different religion. You have a completely different background. And I would have described my family purpose almost identical to what you've just said. We have a family. Our kids are getting older. They'll inherit whatever they'll inherit. And I am very clear that the purpose of these resources is to make a positive impact on the world. And while one kid might think that'll be done in one way and another kid might think it'll be done in another way, everybody's aligned in the fact that we want to use the bulk of these resources to make a better world. The world is in a heap of trouble. It needs a lot of help. The beautiful part about Factory for Good is this sort of wake-up call that many people, when they're creating wealth, have their nose to the grindstone for 5 or 10 or 20 years. And all of a sudden they sell a business and can look around and start imagining all of the things they've missed in all those years. Not everybody does, but most do. The Factory for Good is this beautiful way of giving people some tools to think about what's next. I'm just curious if it's had an impact. How long has the book been out in the market, and what kind of feedback are you getting?
I've joked about it earlier, but not monetary feedback. I mean, I give away a lot of books. I'm happy to have this conversation. I do a lot of free speaking engagements and webinars. And I've been surprised. I've been actually really pleasantly surprised that we wrote this book. And it's very vulnerable writing a book, because it's like you can't finish the conversation. You just print it and put it out there and say, here's what I think. I've met a lot of people and have seen a lot of things and have been inspired by a lot of factories that are being created. And it's only kind of emboldened me more to say, let's really do this. Let's go help motivate more of these families that are in our shoes, that are lucky enough to be where we're at. And let's try to get more factories created. And so we've been doing that for the last year or so, and we've got a lot of families joining with us, and I love it. Honestly, I hope when I die that we can come back and say, wait a minute, Divvy was defining, and that is awesome, but hopefully this Factory for Good period is its own defining moment in its own way and in a different way, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
You know, it's interesting because we were talking before the podcast. So is Bill Gates better known for Microsoft or the Gates Foundation? What do you think?
No, okay, so I'm going to reword the question, and I'm going to ask you, and then I'll tell you my answer.
Okay.
Is Bill Gates done more good for the world in creating Microsoft or in creating the Gates Foundation?
My heart is in the Gates Foundation because of the example he set. One of the things that he did with Warren Buffett is Warren Buffett didn't want to give his money until he died because he was such a good investor. He thought he would leave a lot more money when he died, and Bill Gates convinced him. But you can't say that about a life saved. If you save a life today, what will that life blossom into 20 years from now? And it's not the same math as internal rates of return and growth rates. A charitable impact today could have a dramatic impact a generation from now. And as a result, he convinced Warren Buffett to give, I think, then half of his money to the Gates Foundation, which manages Warren Buffett's money. So although I know about all the jobs and all of the efficiency that Microsoft has created recently, particularly when it's related to the other mega successful Silicon Valley people who seem to be putting money and growth ahead of community or country or so forth, I think Bill Gates stands out right now as somebody who has really become, in later life, one of the great philanthropists of the world. And I think single handedly, largely eliminated malaria and some other diseases. So I'd vote for the foundation, regardless of how successful Microsoft has been.
That is by far the best answer I've ever heard for an opposing view of mine. Honestly, you might have persuaded me. So I'm going to give my answer, and I'm going to bring it back to why I think your answer is amazing. So I usually say, I think typically look at Microsoft and think greedy capitalists made all this money, and then, oh, wow, look at the philanthropy. That's the right answer. And my response is, but it gave the world a personal computer. Do you realize how much of our world, from science to hospitals to all of our future innovations, are coming from personal computers that happen with the internet and all the education? You know, I would go on and on, not about just the money that they made, but about the value that is created inside of a personal computer and what's being created on a Word doc, et cetera. But your answer, which I think is profound, and I want other people to understand that this is where my passion has been lying, is I'm going to families that are in a fortunate position, and I say, hey, if you're able to give away X amount of dollars, which isn't Microsoft, which isn't Bill Gates money, but just a reasonable amount of money every year, we can create real impact in the world. Specifically, we think you can significantly impact over 500 people a year. And I think if you go to a family and you say, look, you know, we can get into all the issues with philanthropy because it's not a perfect world, but if you truly feel before the choices that Michael and your family have made, and writing this check and doing these things has significantly impacted up to 500 people or more than 500 people or even a few people, you can look yourself in the mirror and say, we're doing what we can to make the world a better place. Let's keep going. And that should be this feeling that you're like, oh my gosh, I helped that person who might in a generation change a whole bunch more, and we can change these lives. And that's what Factory for Good is about, that each and every family can sit down and say, how do we come together as a family, look beyond our household to make the world a better place? And I'm saying, yeah, let's go. I know I'm not Warren Buffett or Bill Gates, but I think what's cool about Tiger and about this level of community is there's a lot of people in our shoes. If we take our type A personalities and our success and our intelligence and our work ethic and our purpose and we shift it towards a factory that produces good, the collective amount of change that can come from 50, 100, 500 families choosing to do this, that starts to shift what's out there in the world in terms of kindness and community and opportunity. That's exciting to me. So your answer was inspiring. You might have changed my opinion, so I respect it.
You talk about spending the first third of your life on education, next third on money, and the last third on giving it away. How do people do that?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm a broken horse at this point, but it's the factory. You got to sit down, however you define it, whoever you work with, sit down and define what you want to do to make the world a better place and start doing it wherever you're at. Whether it's rolling up your sleeves for an hour a week or whether it's writing some checks and rolling up your sleeves, be proactive, write a mission statement, figure out with you and your spouse and your family what those key things are and start doing them. And so if you want help, we'll help you. But if you can do it on your own, I would just say, figure it out and be proactive, because you don't reactively change the world.
And you had some formula for charity, living, and enjoyment. What was that?
So I stole this from a mentor of mine. He used kind of a 30-30-30. I know that's not exact math to 100, but he basically said 30 for future, 30 for giving, and 30 for present and experiences and family. And I don't know if there's a perfect equation. I don't know one way to do it, but I think that's a fair equation to look at. When you said earlier, the bulk of the money, as you get older and whatnot, that those numbers might shift, but it also depends on where you're at. But I think it's a good way to live.
Another way to rephrase what you're doing is raising children in successful families is a battle against entitlement, because
Yes,
children who grow up in successful families are naturally entitled. They understand it. If they don't understand it, they're blind. And it's a battle. Their education is really to free them from that entitlement, to push the entitlement away so they can lead lives of meaning. And I think you do that. You talked in the book real quickly about $5,000 miracles. What are those?
actually it stemmed from a friend of mine who used to be our head of sales at Divvy. His name is Woody. He would come into the office and be like, hey, there's a single mom who, like, her car broke down and she can't get her kids to daycare and off to work to provide. And he would just carry a hat around him. It was more digital than that. But he'd be like, who wants to donate? Let's get her a car. So we'd raise like $7,000 in the office to get this mom a car. And I was like, oh, love it. That's something that we're all like super happy to do for this mom who just needs transportation to do it. And he would do it a fair amount and fairly often. And it was inspiring to me. And I've had other people come with me. And basically, whenever we see something that doesn't take much from a collective group of people who have means, to be like, this person's trying and they're working. They just have an asset problem. They need the car, or their house has a leaky roof or whatever. And those are just the little sprinkles. They're not changing the world, but for that one person, it does change their world. And so those have been really meaningful, really fun. And we've been able to get a lot of those away and with a lot of people to join us in doing it.
It's such a beautiful thing. I would call what you just said tactical or reactive philanthropy. And some people want to be more strategic about it. And in our philanthropy, we try and be about 80% strategic so we can effectuate change over long periods of time and to maximum degree, but 20% to leave open for the kind of serendipity and joy and ability to express gratitude directly to recipients who maybe we can make a connection. And if you can spend 10 or 20% of a meaningful philanthropy budget, you can really impact a lot of lives.
That's cool. I like the numbers.
We're going to put this podcast in the archive and take it out in about 30 years and listen to what Alex Bean was saying to 60-year-old Alex Bean or 70-year-old Alex Bean. What do you need to do over the next 30 years that when you listen to this 30 years from now, you'll say, I meant to do that and I did, or I fell short on that? How do you frame that?
I used to tell people if I was going to run a marathon or try to achieve something, I like tell people because I know that they're going to hold me accountable. And so a lot of this, I would say, I know I'm not doing it perfectly. I know I'm trying, but I'm trying to speak it into the world to almost motivate myself. And in 30 years, I would look back and say, I hope you didn't just talk about it. I hope you actually went out and did my goal of significantly impacting 1 million lives. Like, you better mean what you say and go after it. And if that's the case, then I'll be proud that Divvy wasn't my only defining moment. And I can look beyond myself and say there was some good from what I did. And if I didn't, and I just talked about it, then I'll be embarrassed and really sad.
You know, it's interesting. I talked about my admiration for Bill Gates' philanthropy, but how about Mr. Beast?
I love Mr. Beast. I think he's incredible. He puts everything into his creation of value, of entertainment. And then he's shifting that and says, it's not about the money. It's about the creation. It's about the purpose. And he's already said he's going to give away every single cent, and he's doing it as he lives. I think it's really cool.
We could go on and on and on. You are such a fountain of wisdom, and this experience that you've been on for the last 5 years that's allowed you to both pull together this concept of a factory for good. If you have a piece of advice you want to make sure your kids hear, like if they're listening to this podcast, what do you want them to hear from their dad about what's most important?
Family is always most important. But if they don't know our family motto by now, we're going to be in big trouble. And so they better repeat it. I'm going to say it to them. I say it to them pretty often, but we, the Beans, choose to be grateful, kind, loyal, confident, humble, and hardworking. They better repeat that because that's been beaten to their heads. So do your best, try hard, and try to remember the family motto.
How beautiful. At Tiger meetings at the end, we have a tip jar. We try and recommend either a book, a movie, a play, something experiential, a podcast, app. What are one or two tip jar items you'd like to leave for listeners?
I've been listening to the Andre Agassi book, Open, on Audible, and I've really enjoyed it. So I would say that's worth a listen. It's great storytelling. You learn a lot about him, but it's also kind of this way as he reflects on himself. You learn a lot about your own self. And then the other thing is I downloaded an app called Paladin, which is basically scrolling, but for learning. And so that allows you to just learn about different characters in a really quick, digestible way. And I found it to be fun, very engaging. So Paladin and Andre Agassi's book would be my tips.
Obviously, it's been great having you on the show today. How can our audience follow your work?
Factoryforgood.com is our website. We have a newsletter we send out for Factory Fridays. That is the easiest way to just kind of hear what we're doing. But if you're in a family and you want to create your own factory for good, please reach out on our website. We're helping a lot of families sign up and go through the process. We're learning along the way, but it's been thrilling and exciting. We'd love to have more families join us.
By the way, the book on Audible is the shortest book I've ever listened to. It was 4.5 hours, and you packed more wisdom and information into 4.5 hours than any book that I've ever read. I just want to thank you for tuning into Next with Michael Sonnenfeld and our guest today, Alex Bean. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and on YouTube, listeners can also send an email with comments and questions for the podcast to next@muse.com. Alex, it's been great having you today.
Hey, thank you so much. Really enjoyed it. Appreciate it.